You own a ranch, thousands of acres of open land, a herd of cattle grazing on grass that is technically yours in every direction, a farmhouse with a porch wide enough to watch the entire horizon, sunrise over your own hills. That is the image. That is what every ranch listing photograph is engineered to put in your head. That is what every Western film sold you before you were old enough to question whether it was accurate. Here is what the listing photograph does not show you. The fence line that washed out overnight in a spring flood, $40,000 of repair work that needs to happen before the cattle get out onto the road. The well pump that stopped working on a Tuesday with no warning. The hay bill that arrived the same week the cattle market dropped 15%. The 3 consecutive years where every dollar the ranch generated went straight back into the land before you saw a cent of it.
Ranching is one of the most misunderstood businesses in the world. From the outside, it looks like freedom. From the inside, it looks like a business where your revenue arrives once or twice a year and your expenses arrive every single day. And the most important variable in your entire financial equation, the weather, answers to nobody. Some ranches make real money. Some quietly bleed their owners dry while appreciating in value on paper. Some have destroyed people who never saw it coming. By the end of this, you will understand exactly which kind you are likely to buy and why.
What a ranch actually is. Before the money, you need to understand what a ranch actually is. Because ranch is one of those words that describes about a dozen completely different businesses that happen to share a zip code and some fencing. A cattle ranch raises beef animals for market. A sheep ranch produces wool and meat. A horse ranch breeds, trains, and sells horses. A hunting ranch monetizes wildlife access rather than livestock. A guest ranch sells the experience of ranch life, trail rides, open fires, the feeling of being somewhere completely different for a long weekend. And a luxury recreational ranch may raise almost nothing at all. Its primary product is a tax advantage and a private address.
These are not the same business. A guest ranch is essentially a boutique hotel with horses. A working cattle operation is a commodity protein farm competing against global beef markets every single day. One of them needs a great chef and comfortable beds. The other needs a veterinarian and a functioning hay operation. Calling both of them a ranch is like calling a bakery and a manufacturing plant, both just businesses. This video focuses primarily on the cattle ranch, the most common version, the one most people picture, and the one with the most financial moving parts.
The land. The number that keeps getting bigger. The single largest cost of owning a ranch is not the cattle, not the equipment, and not the labor. It is the land itself. And depending on where you buy, that number ranges from surprisingly manageable to genuinely staggering. Pasture land in the American interior can be found for under $1,000 per acre in remote, harsh climate states. That sounds cheap until you understand what cheap land actually means in practice. Cheap land in the West is usually sparse land. Each cow needs far more of it to survive because the grass is thin and the growing season is short. A harsh climate operation might need 20 to 30 acres per cow. In a milder southern state with denser vegetation and a longer growing season, the same cow might only need 2 to 8 acres.
The expensive land is often cheaper to operate on per animal. The cheap land forces you to spend more on everything else. More acreage, more hay through a longer winter, longer distances to markets, higher transportation costs every time you move an animal. The first lesson of ranch economics, the price of the land and the profitability of operating on that land are 2 completely different numbers. They frequently move in opposite directions. If you want to run a cattle operation large enough to generate meaningful income, somewhere around 500 cows, the land requirement alone ranges from 10,000 to 15,000 acres. Depending on where you are. At even the cheapest land prices, that is $10 to $15 million before a single cow, before a single fence post, before any infrastructure has been touched. At premium land prices near major cities or resort regions, the same acreage becomes financially impossible to justify on agricultural returns alone. You are no longer buying what the land produces. You are buying the view and what the land is worth to the next buyer. Infrastructure, what the listing price doesn't include. You close the deal. You own the land. What you actually own at that moment is an expensive piece of ground with the for sale sign removed. Before that land produces a single dollar, you need to make it operational. And this is the stage that catches most new owners completely off guard, because the infrastructure costs are not optional, they are not small, and they do not appear anywhere in the listing. Fencing first. A standard barbed wire fence runs roughly $8,000 to $13,000 per mile to install professional. That sounds manageable until you consider that a 15,000-acre ranch has a perimeter of 60 to 80 miles, plus interior cross fences to divide the property into separate pastures for rotational grazing. You can spend $300,000 to $600,000 on fencing alone before a single animal sets foot on the property. Water. In most of the American West, surface water is scarce and legally regulated. You need water well. A deep agricultural well costs $8,000 to $25,000 to drill and equip. That pump runs on electricity, which means power lines or solar reaching across miles of remote land. Then underground pipe to move water from the well to the troughs where cattle actually drink. Large properties need multiple wells. Budget $50,000 to $100,000 for water infrastructure before you have a full picture. Then working facilities, heavy steel corrals capable of safely containing animals that do not want to be contained, $15,000 to $50,000. A hydraulic squeeze chute for veterinary work, another $10,000 to $15,000. A hay barn, $40,000 to $150,000. Workers' house, equipment shed, gravel roads, added all up. A new owner on raw land can spend $100,000 to over $1 million on infrastructure before the ranch is even operational. This is money that goes into the and generates no immediate return. It is the cost of being ready to begin.
The livestock. Your inventory breathes. Now you buy the cattle. A commercial cow, a bred female, already pregnant, ready to produce a calf, costs somewhere between $2,000 and $3,500 in a normal market. A herd of 500 commercial cows costs somewhere between $1 million and $1.5 million to assemble. These are not prize animals. These are working cattle. Now add bulls. You need roughly one bull for every 25 to 30 cows. For 500 cows, that is 17 to 20 bulls. A basic commercial bull costs $3,500 to $5,000. A quality bull with documented genetics can run $10,000 to $50,000 at auction.
Genetics matter more than people outside this industry realize. A bull that produces calves grading at choice rather than select at the packing plant can mean $50 to $100 more per animal. Across hundreds of calves per year, the genetics in your bullpen directly determine a significant portion of your annual income. But bulls get injured. A good bull can break a leg in a creek crossing and be gone before Monday morning. The bull you paid $35,000 for does not come with a warranty. You need backup. All in for a 500 cow operation, livestock investment somewhere between $1.2 and $2 million. And unlike a warehouse, your inventory breathes, eats, gets sick, escapes, and occasionally refuses to cooperate.
Equipment. The fleet that never stops breaking. A ranch without machinery cannot function. The equipment list is longer than it looks and more expensive than it sounds. At minimum, you need 2 tractors, because when one breaks during calving season or during the winter feeding rush, you cannot wait 3 weeks for a repair. Utility tractors, capable of running hay equipment, cost $60,000 to $120,000 each. New. You need heavy-duty pickup trucks, capable of pulling loaded livestock trailers, $55,000 to $85,000 each. A gooseneck livestock trailer to move cattle to auction. A hay baler if you're growing your own hay. A utility vehicle for checking fences across rough terrain.
One common mistake new ranch owners make is buying everything new and financing it. The monthly debt service on $200,000 of financed equipment can run $3,000 to $4,000 a month. That is $36,000 to $48,000 a year in equipment payments before a single animal is sold. On a small or mid-sized operation, that payment alone can be the difference between breaking even and losing money. The smarter approach, the one experienced ranchers use, is to buy equipment sized to the actual operation And buy used when possible. A person running 200 cows does not need the same tractor as a person running 1,000. The operating costs, the bills that arrive every day. Here is the structural problem at the heart of cattle ranching. It is the one thing that separates people who understand this business from people who are surprised by it. Revenue arrives seasonal. Expenses arrive daily. When you sell cattle, you get paid in the autumn, once, maybe twice a year. When the hay bill arrives, when the vet calls, when the fence washes out, those bills do not wait for autumn. They arrive whenever they arrive. Feed is the largest single operating cost. When grass is growing, cattle graze for free. Grass does not grow year-round in most of the country. From late autumn through early spring in a typical northern state, you are buying and hauling hay every single day. One cow in a cold winter needs roughly one large round bale every 3 to 4 days. 500 cows through 150 days of winter feeding means somewhere between $125,000 and $300,000 just in hay in a normal winter. Add a late spring storm, add a dry summer that stunted the hay crop, add fuel prices running higher than expected. The feed line on your budget becomes very uncomfortable very fast. Veterinary costs are the second surprise. Calves are born in February blizzards and need intervention to survive. A herd of 500 cows needs systematic vaccination, pregnancy testing, deworming, and emergency care. Basic herd health adds $35 to $60 per head per year, $17,000 to $30,000 annually in a good year. Labor is third. You cannot run a real cattle operation alone. You need experienced hands who can actually ride horses and work cattle, plus someone capable of keeping the equipment running. Finding reliable, experienced ranch help has become one of the hardest problems in modern agriculture. Add property taxes, liability insurance, electricity for the wells, fuel for the vehicle fleet, and routine repairs. The operating cost of a serious ranch is not a part-time expense. It is a business with a payroll, a utility bill, and a maintenance schedule. 7 days a week, every single day. The revenue, the part that has to work. The core of a cattle ranch's revenue model is simple. You raise a calf, you sell the calf. A cow is pregnant for 9 months, delivers a calf, nurses it for 6 to 8 months, and then you wean the calf and sell it by the pound. A typical weaned calf weighs 500 to 600 at reasonable market prices. A single steer calf at weaning might sell for around $2,000 to $2,500. Run the math on 500 cows. A strong conception and calving rate, call it 90%. Which is good, means you wean around 450 calves, half steers, half heifers, an average net sale price across the whole calf crop of around $2,200 per head. 450 calves times $2,200 equals roughly $1 million in gross revenue. Against that $1 million, your total costs, feed, veterinary, labor, fuel, taxes, insurance, equipment depreciation run somewhere between $900,000 and $1.1 million on a well-run operation of this size. Do the math. In a good year, in a strong market, you might net somewhere between $0 and $100,000 on a 500 cow operation, requiring an initial investment of $7 to $12 million in land, infrastructure, and livestock. That is a return on investment of somewhere between 0 and about 1.4%. A savings account at a credit union pays more. This is the thing nobody in the romance of the industry wants to say out loud. The cash-on-cash returns from simply selling calves are, in most years, remarkably thin, sometimes negative. And those numbers assumed a 90% calf crop, strong market prices, and a normal winter. None of those things are guaranteed. The volatility, what you cannot control. If you want to understand what ranch economics actually looks like from the inside, you do not need a spreadsheet. You need to look at what drought does to a ranching family that has been in the business for 2 or 3 generations. These are not first-time buyers. These are families who have ranched the same land for decades. They know every water hole, every low spot where the grass comes in thick, every corner of the property, and drought does not care. When a drought hits, the sequence goes like this. The grass stops growing in June.
instead of September. You start buying hay 2 months early. The hay you need is now in short supply because every rancher in the region needs it too. So the price goes up, sometimes double or triple what it was the year before. You can either buy it at those prices and watch your operating costs spike, or you can sell cattle to reduce the herd so there are fewer mouths to feed. If you sell, you get a decent price per head initially.
But you have destroyed your production capacity. You sold cow, your income-generating assets. The following year, you have fewer calves to sell. And to rebuild the herd after the drought ends, you have to buy replacement cattle at prices that are now high because every rancher in the region is trying to rebuild at the same time. Then there is the cattle market cycle itself. Cattle prices move in historical cycle, roughly 8 to 12 years from peak to trough and back again. In a single marketing season, feeder steer prices can drop significantly from their peak. Ranchers who bought replacement cattle at high prices find themselves holding animals worth considerably less than what they paid. The costs of ranching are relatively fixed: feed, labor, property taxes. These do not adjust downward when the market turns against you. The revenue is anything but fixed. A $50 per hundredweight swing in the cattle market applied across 450 calves at 500 pounds each means over $100,000 of revenue that can appear or disappear based purely on market timing. The costs are fixed. The revenue is volatile. That combination is what makes this business so demanding to survive long term.
How the ranches that last actually work. The ranchers who build lasting wealth are not the ones who got lucky in a good market year. They are the ones who managed costs tightly enough to survive the bad years without being forced to sell the land, and who built revenue from more than one place. Hunting leases are one of the most reliable secondary income streams in ranching, and one of the most underutilized by operators who think of themselves purely as cattle ranchers. In good hunting country, annual per-acre lease rates for access rights can run from $5 to $25 per acre. On a 15,000-acre ranch, that is $75,000 to $375,000 per year for access rights alone. The cattle are still there. The grass is still there. You have not sold anything. Hay production and hay sales offer another underused revenue stream. In good years with surplus production, hay becomes a sellable commodity to neighboring ranchers. In drought years, that hay can become more valuable than the cattle themselves.
Conservation easements are the most powerful and most misunderstood financial tool available to landowners. You agree with a nonprofit land trust to permanently restrict certain uses of the property. No subdivision, no commercial development. Preserve the natural character of the land. In exchange, you claim a charitable tax deduction equal to the decline in the property's market value caused by those restrictions. For qualifying agricultural landowners, this deduction can eliminate federal income tax liability for over a decade. It is not a loophole. It is a provision in the federal tax code specifically designed to incentivize private landowners to preserve agricultural land rather than sell it to developers. Guest ranch and agritourism revenue has expanded significantly in recent decades. People want to experience ranch life without the commitment of actually ranching. Premium guest ranch rates can run $300 to $800 per person per night, all inclusive. The point is not that any one of these alternatives transforms a struggling cattle operation into a thriving business overnight. The point is that a ranch with multiple revenue streams, cattle, hay, hunting leases, conservation income, guest experiences, has much smoother cash flow and a much higher tolerance for the bad years the cattle business inevitably delivers.
Why wealthy people keep buying ranches. Here is something that puzzles people who look at the operational economics we just described. If ranching produces such thin margins, why do some of the wealthiest people in the world keep buying ranches at prices no agricultural business could ever justify on cattle revenue alone? The answer is that they are not primarily buying a cattle business. They are buying something else that happens to sit on the same land.
Privacy. A 100,000-acre ranch is an address that essentially does not exist on a public map. A private airstrip, a perimeter that keeps the outside world at a meaningful distance. For someone whose net worth is measured in billions, that is worth a significant premium that has nothing to do with beef prices. Long-term capital appreciation. Agricultural land in most regions has appreciated reliably over the long run. It does not go to zero. It does not have a bad earnings quote. It does not collapse in a weekend when a technology sector sells off. It is slow, but it is real, and it is consistent.
The conservation easement mathematics. A large landowner who donates a conservation easement on a property worth $100 million can claim a deduction equal to the restriction's impact on the property's value, potentially $50 to $60 million. At the highest marginal federal tax rate, that shelters the equivalent of roughly $20 million in taxes. The property continues to be owned and used. The tax benefit is immediate and legally sound. Agricultural tax exemptions at the state level complete the picture. In many states, maintaining an active agricultural operation on a property qualifies the land for an agricultural tax exemption that dramatically reduces the annual property tax bill. For a wealthy buyer, running a small cattle operation purely to maintain that exemption is an entirely rational financial decision. The cattle are not the business. The tax status is the business.
A realistic scenario. Here is what a realistic first year actually looks like. Not a worst case, and not a best case. You buy 5,000 acres in a productive agricultural region. You assemble a herd of 200 cows. The land costs result in annual debt service of roughly $1.4 million. Infrastructure that needs upgrading before you start, $300,000. Livestock, 200 cows and 12 bulls, roughly $500,000 to $600,000. Equipment, bought used and sensibly sized, $250,000. First-year operating costs for 200 cows at current per-head rates, around $200,000. First-year calf crop, assume 170 calves at strong market prices. Average $2,200 per calf. Gross calf revenue is approximately $374,000. Net operating income from the cattle before land costs, $162,000 against annual land debt service of $1.4 million.
This is why the industry talks about ranches producing a return on assets of 1 to 3% in a good year. The asset, the land, is too expensive relative to what it can produce agriculturally, but the land itself is likely worth more in 5 years than it was on day one. If the land appreciates at 4% annual, that generates appreciation roughly equal to the annual debt service. What you are doing, in essence, is using the cattle operation to cover the operating costs, while the land itself builds equity. The cattle pay for the privilege of owning the land. The land builds the wealth. That is the actual economics of ranching for most serious owners. The good year, 500 cows, 90% calving rate. Markets stay strong. Average net sale price across the calf crop, $2,300. Total calf revenue, just over $1 million. Hay was cheap after a wet spring. Operating costs ran $900,000. Net profit from the cattle, $135,000. The land appreciated 4%. A genuine good year. The bad, a late spring storm kills 60 calves over 2 days in March. Drought in July means you start buying hay 2 months early at prices 30% above budget. Your hay cost runs $200,000 above forecast. The cattle market softens in autumn. Total calf revenue, $720,000. Operating costs hit $1.1 million. Net loss from the cattle operation, $380,000. Land value flat, no appreciation. The gap between those two scenarios is over $500,000. That gap is driven almost entirely by weather and market time, two things you cannot control. The difference between ranchers who build well and ranchers who go broke is not intelligence. It is not even work ethic, because everyone in this industry works hard. It is cash reserves. diversified revenue, and the ability to survive the bad without being forced to sell the land, because the land is the whole game.
The romance of the ranch is real. The open horizon, the physical work, the connection to something that has existed for generations, the feeling of owning something that will outlast you. These are genuine, and they are worth something that does not appear on a balance sheet. The economics of the ranch are complicated. The people who thrive here are the ones who hold both of those truths at the same time.